Chapter 1. The Glowing Eyes in the Dark. At that moment, the clock struck exactly 3 o'clock in the morning. John's old wooden house lay still in the remote outskirts, where wind from the northern forest blew in, carrying a chilling dampness. He was accustomed to the long, lonely nights, when only the rustling of leaves against the window and the distant call of an owl were his companions. But this night there was another sound, so small, so stealthy, as if something was gently knocking on the door of his life. A soft, dragging scrape echoed from the porch. Startled awake, John sat bolt upright in the thick darkness. He strained his ears, initially thinking it was just a dry branch tapping against the wood. But no, it had a rhythm, a strange persistence, as if deliberate hands or claws were seeking attention. He slowly swung his legs out of bed. His bare feet felt icy against the hard wooden floor. The air inside the house was thick with mustiness, while outside, the wind howled like a warning. As John approached the front door, the sound grew clearer. Scratch, 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 slender claws scraping the wood surface. He cracked the door open, and in that instant, John's world froze. 2 blazing yellow eyes, bright as embers, stared directly at him from the darkness. They were unlike any animal's eyes he had ever seen. Not feral, not afraid, but deep, sharp, as if reading his every heartbeat. Below that gaze, a lithe body with sleek reddish-brown fur blended into the gloom, a fox. John stood motionless. For a few seconds, he heard nothing but his pounding heart. The fox did not flee, nor did it growl. It simply stood there, on the threshold, eyes locked on him. Its small form seemed to merge with the night, leaving only that glowing stare, sending chills through him. A gust of wind blew, making the door tremble. John felt like he was standing at an invisible boundary. One step out, and he would cross into another story, something not predetermined in his monotonous life. But before he could decide, the fox slowly tilted its head, an almost probing gesture. Its ears perked, listening. Then its claws lightly scratched again. Scratch, scratch. John drew a deep breath, trying to steady himself. Part of him insisted it was just a lost wild animal driven by hunger in the freezing night. But another part, one he dared not name, whispered that there was something more going on. Those eyes, that gaze, it was not merely survival instinct. For an instant, he remembered the stories his mother used to tell when he was a child, that foxes carried the secrets of the ancient forest, that their eyes held a world beyond human understanding. He once scoffed at those words. Until now, in the silent night, entrapped by that gaze, John opened the door wider. The dim light from the oil lamp inside spilled onto the porch. The fox did not back off. It stood still, its fur lightly rippling in the wind. Both stood in a silent contest. Then, as John was about to speak, the yellow eyes blinked, softly, as if whispering without a sound. A question echoed in his mind. Why has it come here, and what is that gaze trying to tell me? The question hovered in the air, blending with the cold wind's howl, unlocking a secret John did not yet know but which would surely change everything. Chapter 2. A Gift from the Darkness. John closed the door, but for the rest of the night, sleep eluded him. The blazing yellow eyes remained etched in his mind, like embers burning through old memories he thought he had long forgotten. He finally drifted off at dawn, only to wake a few hours later, weary, his whole body heavy as though he had endured a long, burdensome dream. The day passed like a foggy blur. John carried out routine chores, repairing a decaying fence, sweeping the front yard, stoking the fire in the hearth. But in every moment, he felt the fox's gaze lurking at the edges of memory. For the first time in years, he sensed his home was no longer a place of absolute stillness. It had been touched by another presence, mysterious, inexplicable, yet not unfamiliar. When darkness fell again, John found himself standing by the window, eyes fixed on the dirt road leading into the forest. Time flowed slowly, until near midnight, when cold winds began to sweep across the porch. He heard it again. Scratch, scratch, the rhythmic, patient scraping of claws on wood. The fox had returned. John opened the door again, this time less startled. It stood there calmly, its yellow eyes still intent. In that moment, a thought flickered in his mind. Perhaps it was seeking food. After all, winter here was harsh, and hunger could drive any creature toward humans. So John quietly returned to the kitchen, fetched some leftover cold meat, and placed it on an old plate, then brought it out onto the porch. He set the plate before the fox, then stepped back slowly. The animal didn't rush forward. It merely sniffed, eyes still fixed on him. Only after John had taken a few steps away did it lean down and begin nibbling small bites. The sight soothed him, a fragile trust, newly held, formed between two beings from different worlds. The second night passed in quiet peace. John told himself the fox might not return the next night, but on the third night, at the familiar hour, he heard the sound again at the door. This time, the fox brought something. On the porch, just before its paws, lay an object smeared with mud. The faint light from the oil lamp revealed a metal ring, dull and rusty, yet faintly gleaming in the night. John squinted and stepped closer. His heart suddenly stopped. It was a necklace, old, tarnished, caked in dirt, yet the intricate carvings remained clear. John recognized it immediately, not as something unfamiliar, but as the very item he had seen hundreds of times on the neck of the only woman he had ever loved without condition, his mother. John dropped to his knees. His hand trembled as he touched the necklace. The cold metal spread shivers through his flesh. His mind spun. How could it be? His mother had died many years ago, and he had thought that necklace was buried with her. Then how could it end up here, in the paws of a wild fox? He looked up. The fox still stood there, its yellow gaze watching every movement. There was no randomness in that look. It felt like a message, a deliberate offering. Goosebumps rose on his skin. A flood of emotions swept through him, curiosity, shock, and then a rising unease. It felt as though an invisible hand was tugging him back into the past, toward memories he had tried to bury. He thought of his mother's funeral, the wooden box where she kept her treasured items, the cold stillness of earth at the gravesite. So why was that necklace here? John clutched it in his hand and looked at the fox. He wanted to shout a question, demand an explanation, but only silence remained. The fox tilted its head, watching quietly. A wind blew through, tousling his hair and carrying with it that overwhelming sensation. That night, John could not sleep. He sat at the table, the necklace before him, his eyes fixed on it as if it might vanish if he looked away. In his mind raced a series of hypotheses. Was someone playing a prank? Had someone exhumed the grave? Yet none could explain one thing. Why did a fox bring it? The coincidence was too great, so contrived it felt orchestrated, and John began to sense clearly he had been drawn into a secret, an invisible labyrinth whose entrance he himself had once forgotten. From that moment on, he knew this would not end here. The fox would return, and what it carried next would perhaps be far more than an old necklace. Chapter 3. A Path into the Darkness. The old necklace was not the only gift. John realized that as the fourth night drew near, the sky woven with thick gray clouds that blotted out the crescent moon. He sat alone in the living room, the oil lamp casting a yellowed light, flickering like the breath of someone on the verge of death. On the table, the necklace remained still, dried soil clinging to its carved crevices as if it had just been pulled from beneath the ground. When the clock's hand hit that familiar hour, the sound came again. Scratch, scratch, a refrain impossible to mistake. His heart pounded, not from surprise this time, but from anticipation mixed with unease. John stepped to the door, his hand trembling as it touched the wooden latch. On the porch, the fox stood again, but this time, beneath its paw, lay something else, a torn photograph. John bent down and picked it up. The photo was faded, the paper so thin it seemed it might crumble at any moment. In the flickering light, he recognized his younger self, standing beside a woman, his mother, and in the background was an old house at the forest's edge. The home his family once lived in, abandoned for years now. John froze. He could not remember ever owning this photo. Where had it come from? Why was it torn in half? And why had the fox brought it to him? A chill ran down his spine. The unanswered questions piled up like crashing waves. The next night, just as he feared, the fox returned. This time it carried a rusty key, about half the size of his hand, the iron corroded but still intact. John picked it up and felt a strange heaviness, as though the key belonged to a door he had never dared open. He twisted it in his hand. The screech of metal rubbing sent shivers through him. A hazy memory flashed. When he was young, He had seen his father with a similar key, always hung on the wall near a small cellar behind their old house. But that cellar, no one had spoken of it in years. John began to see a pattern. Every item the fox brought was connected to his family, to a past buried under layers of time. It could not be coincidence. On the sixth night, the gift was a folded piece of paper, soaked and smudged, the ink smeared but still legible in a few lines. "Trust no one. Keep it hidden until it can." John read it over and over again, each word slicing deeper into his mind. Who had written it? To whom? And why had this message come through the claws of a wild animal? Confusion turned into obsession. John felt himself drawn into a strange game, with the fox as the guide. Each object was a puzzle piece, pulling him further away from his quiet life, closer to some dark secret. He made a decision. He had to follow its trail. One night, when the fox turned to leave, John grabbed his coat, took a flashlight, and silently followed. The fox's small silhouette was nimble, nearly vanishing between dark bushes. John had to strain his eyes, stepping lightly on dry leaves, his heartbeat louder than the wind. The path led him deep into the forest. Each step was a step backward into the past. The towering trees intertwined above, blocking out the sky, making the air thick and cold. The fox kept its steady pace, occasionally glancing back to make sure he was still there. After nearly 30 minutes, it stopped. Before John stood a rundown house, collapsed roof tiles, moss-covered wooden walls. It was his family's old home. A place once filled with laughter now sat like a tombstone, engulfed in silent darkness. John stood frozen. Why had the fox brought him here? All the items, it all connected back to this house. His heart tightened. Memories flooded back like a storm. Family dinners, arguments between his parents, the nights he snuck out to watch the moon when sleep would not come. And then, the fateful day he left and never returned. Until now. But before he could gather his thoughts, a new sound froze him in place. Footsteps, echoing from within the house. Not the fox's. Heavy, deliberate steps pressing into rotted floorboards. John held his breath, gripping the flashlight tighter. Someone, or something, was inside the abandoned house. The fox stayed still, its yellow eyes glowing in the dark, staring straight at John as if to say, "This is only the beginning." John felt his breath catch in his throat. A vague yet overwhelming fear rose. He wanted to run, but curiosity, or maybe fate, rooted his feet. He understood. He had gone too far to turn back. And deep down, John knew the fox was not done. It was not just delivering objects. It was guiding him toward a truth long buried. A truth he was not yet ready to face. Chapter 4. The Unearthed Truth. The darkness inside the abandoned house was so thick it felt tangible. John stood on the porch, gripping the flashlight, its narrow beam scanning the void, revealing only decaying wooden walls and a thick layer of dust on the floor. The fox sat silently at the edge of the yard, watching like a gatekeeper to some strange ritual. The footsteps continued inside, slow, heavy, rhythmic, like someone pacing in the dark. John held his breath, every sense heightened. Cold sweat beaded on his forehead despite the biting winter air. It felt like he had stepped onto a stage where every move was already written. He drew a long breath and stepped inside. The floorboards creaked beneath his feet, echoing like warnings. Everything seemed to resist his presence, as if the house resented the return of the one who had left it. But those golden eyes outside kept watching, pushing him forward. John crept through the old hallway. Memories surged. This was where he had once run as a child, where his mother hung family photos, where his father sat drinking in silence. Now all that remained was a rotten shell, but beneath the decay, something pulsed, waiting to be revealed. Then he saw it, a low wooden door hidden behind a torn curtain at the end of the hall. That door, he remembered it well. It led to the cellar behind the house, a place his father had always forbidden him to enter. His heart pounded, blood rushing to his temples. In his hand, the rusty key the fox had brought now felt scorching hot, urging him forward. He slid the key into the lock. A click echoed. This door had not opened in years. The rusted hinges screeched, the sound piercing through the house like a scream from beneath the earth. John shined his light downward. A narrow wooden staircase led into the shadows. The air that rose up was foul, thick, like it had been sealed away for decades. He swallowed hard and stepped down, 1 foot at a time. The cellar was small, damp. The wooden ceiling was so low he had to crouch. His flashlight swept over rough stone walls, revealing old wooden shelves. Then, in the corner, he saw it, a heavy iron chest, coated in dust and cobwebs. His heart stopped. He opened it. Inside was a pile of objects, blood-stained fabric browned with age, a few yellowed notebooks, and a familiar tablecloth, the one that used to lie in their kitchen, where his mother often sat sewing. John froze. Why was it all here, in this dark cellar? His hands trembled as he opened one of the notebooks. The writing was messy, uneven, rushed, like someone scribbling in panic. Short, haunting phrases. No one can find out. It must disappear. If John knows, everything falls apart. He read them again and again, cold sweat pouring down his back. The handwriting, it was his father's. In that moment, he heard something behind him. He turned, no one there, but the sensation of being watched was so strong he could barely breathe. His shadow, stretched along the wall under the wavering flashlight, shook like it had a life of its own. John searched the chest further. Beneath the dirty fabric, his hand touched something cold and heavy. He pulled it out, a broken phone, screen shattered, stained with dark, dried smears. He held the flashlight closer, and his heart exploded. It was blood. His hands shook violently. The phone slipped and crashed to the stone floor. The cellar seemed to quake. Panic surged. He stumbled back, gasping, heart pounding like a war drum. Memories of his mother, of her final days, slammed into him. Could it be? Her death was not natural. John felt like he was suffocating. He bolted up the stairs, flung the door open, and leaned against the wall. Heaving, the fox still sat outside, its golden eyes cutting through the night. And in that moment, John understood. It had led him to the heart of the secret, but he no longer had the strength to keep it buried. He pulled out his phone and called the police. As the dial tone rang, his hand trembled. His voice cracked as he tried to explain everything. The fox, the objects, the blood-stained phone in the cellar. On the other end, the officer paused, then asked if he was certain. John clutched the phone and nearly screamed. "I saw it with my own eyes. It's right here, in the cellar. You have to come now." He collapsed to the floor, drenched in sweat, limbs frozen with cold, his breathing ragged, heartbeat wild, his body trembling uncontrollably. In that moment, he felt powerless over his life. The truth was closing in, memories awakened, and it all began with the golden eyes of a fox. That night, John sat in the dark, back against the wall, eyes fixed on the cellar door. He knew now that nothing would ever be the same again. Chapter 5. When the darkness falls silent. The police arrived that very night. Red and blue lights swept across the front yard of the abandoned house, illuminating cracked wooden walls. John stood still, his face hollow, his hands trembling as if he had not yet escaped the nightmare. He recounted everything through broken words, leading them down to the cellar. And just as he said, the evidence was there, waiting silently to be uncovered. Officers searched every corner, collecting the iron chest, the fabric scraps, the notebooks, and the blood-stained phone. Everything was sealed in evidence bags. Their flashlights scanned every shadow, missing nothing. The air was thick, on the verge of rupture. John felt like a spectator to his own life, helpless as his family's secrets were unearthed piece by piece. When things calmed, one officer turned to him and asked, "You said a fox led you here?" John nodded. His voice was hoarse. "Yes, every night it brought me something, and then it led me here." The officer stared at him, his gaze a mixture of doubt and pity. But John had no energy left to explain. All he knew, with clarity as bright as the moon above, was this: if not for the fox, he would have never found that cellar, never discovered what had been buried. As they left, the officers told him to wait for the results of the investigation. They said little, but John knew his life would never be peaceful again. He stood on the porch, watching the police cars disappear down the road. The flashing lights faded, returning the night to stillness. And then, he noticed, the fox was gone. No more glowing yellow eyes watching him. No more claw scratches at the door. Only the damp ground remained, faint with tiny footprints leading toward the edge of the forest. The tracks faded, then vanished into the mist. John followed a few steps, then stopped. He understood the fox would not return. Its mission was complete, a mission he had never imagined. Now, all that remained was him, and the secret that had been unearthed. In his chest rose a tide of emotions, gratitude, guilt, and emptiness. He knew he owed thanks to that creature, though he could never say it aloud. And one question echoed endlessly in his mind. How did it know? Why did it choose me? There was no answer, only the silent night and the memory of those golden eyes. Eyes that seemed to see into every corner of his soul, delivering a message beyond human reason. John turned to look at the old house, where his family's secret had been buried for so many years. A chapter of the past had opened, but the one who guided him was gone. On that damp and cold ground, he was left alone with questions that would never be fully answered. That night, as the wind whispered through the forest, John closed his eyes, and for a brief moment, he thought he saw the fox in the distance, turning back one last time, those golden eyes glowing with a final message. Then its shape dissolved into the darkness, leaving behind absolute silence. Chapter 6: The Connection Beyond Species. In the days that followed, John lived in a silence unlike any before. The police continued their investigation, but he no longer cared what they might uncover. What haunted him now, what lingered like a permanent ink stain, were those golden eyes in the night. He often stood on the porch waiting, hoping the fox would return, but the night remained quiet, with only the howling wind carrying a coldness that pierced to the bone. The old tracks had vanished, leaving behind bare, damp soil. Each night, he came to realize something new, that strange presence had become part of his life, and its absence left a void. John began to understand that some connections do not require logic to explain. It was not chance, it was not just animal instinct. The fox had chosen him, not for food, not for shelter, but because of an invisible thread that connected two beings, transcending the boundaries of species. One morning, as the first light filtered through the treetops, John stood gazing at the forest in the distance. He smiled softly, for the first time in years. It was not because the mystery had been solved, but because he realized he had been saved, not by people, but by a wild creature. He told himself, sometimes, salvation comes from the most unexpected place, from a knock in the night, from eyes that glow in the dark. And deep within his mind, he still saw that image, the fox turning back one final time, its golden eyes burning like fire, speaking no words, yet sending a silent message, a message of empathy, of trust, of the invisible bond that ties the hearts of man and beast. The night may fall silent, but those eyes, they will remain forever.